Hey, Army, it's Taehyung here, or simply V, if you prefer the name that feels like music. Before we start, let me just say this thank you. Thank you for always showing up with open ears and open hearts. I know a lot of you listen to me through songs, through stages, through performances that shine brighter than real life sometimes allows. But today, I want to speak to you without the spotlight glare, without the PR polish, without the emotional noise canceling filter. I hope you're comfortable right now. Maybe you're lying down, maybe you're multitasking, maybe you're just here because you sensed there was more truth in this headline than the world usually gets to see. Whatever brought you here, I hope you stay. Not for the shock value, not for the drama, but for the heartbeat behind it. Because this story, it didn't start on a stage. It started in silence, the heavy kind, the kind that lands when someone you love speaks from fear instead of anger. When my mother said the words, they weren't loud, but they were absolute. My mom said if I marry him, I'm never allowed home again. No thunder, no shouting, just a quiet sentence that shook my entire world. And for the first time, I'm finally ready to tell you everything that came after that moment. So breathe with me, Army. Let's walk into it together from the beginning, from the truth. From the part of me that once thought silence was safer than love until life proved otherwise. Alright, here we go. I used to believe love was gentle, predictable, something that came quietly, like the morning sun warming the curtains before touching your face. But life has a way of turning warmth into wildfire without warning. The day my mother said it, the world didn't stop. She didn't yell. She didn't cry at first. She simply looked at me the way someone looks at a song they used to know by heart but can't sing anymore. And then she said the sentence that would rewrite the map of my life. If you marry him, don't ever come home again. No shaking voice, no slammed doors, just a quiet break in the air like the moment before a record needle touches vinyl. I've lived a life where millions chant my name in perfect synchronization, where light sticks form galaxies under my feet, where cameras capture every blink and breath like evidence of existence. But the loudest moment of my life wasn't broadcast, it was the quiet test. Because when silence has no audience, it belongs only to you. And that silence wrapped around my throat tighter than any high note ever could. Home used to be easy. Daegu nights, my father pretending not to listen while humming along to songs I practiced. My mother folding laundry with the precision of someone arranging choreography. Back then, love was an unspoken thing, automatic, stitched into the seams of everyday life. It was warm rice and warmer advice. Don't trust the world too easily, but don't fear it either, she'd say, tapping my forehead like she was saving a thought directly into my mind. I trusted her because her voice was the first sound I ever learned. Then soul happened, opportunity with a price tag, dreams delivered with contracts and pressure, but also friendships that felt like fate. It was in that city of echoing footsteps and late night convenience store confessions that love changed shape. It didn't look like sunlight or sound like advice anymore. It looked like a person whose name I won't repeat too often, not out of shame, but out of reverence. Because some names don't need repetition to stay permanent. He was someone I knew long enough to forget when I started needing him. Someone whose presence didn't roar but resonated like bass under floorboards. Like a harmony you don't notice until it's removed from the track. I always thought love would fit neatly into a song, a perfect bridge between verses. But real love doesn't wait for the chorus, it interrupts the rehearsal. My mother grew up in a world where love follows rules older than air conditioning and idle training rooms. A world where family names are promises and traditions are borders you're not supposed to cross. She didn't hate him. That was the tragedy. She feared losing me more than she feared losing the argument. Her ultimatum wasn't born from anger, but from the same instinct that made her knit gloves for me every winter, even when I kept losing them. I wanted to tell her that love isn't betrayal, that choosing someone doesn't erase where you came from, that the heart can hold more than one address at a time. But explanations sounded pathetic against the quiet strength of her fear, so I didn't argue. Not because I agreed, but because love taught me that some wars are fought in pauses, not sentences. After that day, I drafted messages I never sent, long paragraphs that dissolved into backspace dust before reaching her phone. I told myself maybe tomorrow would be different. Maybe she'd call first. Maybe forgiveness moves slower than fame. Maybe love isn't the thing that breaks us, but the thing that forces the cracks to show. Army thinks they know me because they've heard my voice break on stage during emotional songs, but my voice broke that day too, just not into a microphone. It broke inward into a place even I hadn't visited before, a place between boyhood and adulthood, between sun and man, between living and longing. The internet loves drama because it moves fast and feels big. But the biggest stories aren't loud. They're the ones that don't trend immediately because they take time to be understood. This is one of them. Noto headline. A heartbeat. And for the first time in a long time, mine was irregular, unedited, and terrifyingly real. Love doesn't ask permission before arriving. Family doesn't ask permission before worrying. And I was standing exactly at the intersection of both, wondering why no song ever prepared me for a moment like this. Maybe because songs are written after the pain, not before. And this one was still happening, still unwritten, still mine to survive. Love is a strange thing. It doesn't ask if you're ready. It doesn't check if your hands are steady. It simply knocks, and by the time you realize it, you've already opened the door. When my mother said those words, I expected something in me to harden, to shut down, to armor itself like the world taught idols to armor their emotions before going live. But the opposite happened. I became softer. Pain has a way of sanding down the sharp edges you never asked for, exposing the parts of you that bruise easily. After that conversation, I walked out into the cold air of the evening like someone stepping off a stage after a concert that demanded everything from their lungs, except this time, no applause came to catch me. Just wind that felt like questions I didn't know how to answer yet. I remember gripping the straps of my bag tighter than necessary, as if holding something external could stop the unraveling inside. Jimin didn't ask what was wrong when he saw me later that night. He simply slid a cup of warm tea across the table in the dorm kitchen. It was chamomile. He remembered I liked it. Some people memorize your coffee order. Others memorize the temperature your heart needs when it's about to collapse. He sat beside me, knees pulled up, oversized hoodie swallowing half of his frame. After a long, quiet sip, he said, "Sometimes love asks you to grow faster than your parents expected." His voice wasn't poetic on purpose. He just speaks like that naturally, like he's translating emotional weather into sentences. I laughed a little, not because it was funny, but because humor is the pressure valve of grief. You crack it open just enough so the system doesn't explode. He smiled, he didn't push. That's the magic of him. He let silence finish its own speech. RM joined us minutes later, leaning against the counter, arms folded. He carries leadership the way the sky carries clouds, effortless, inevitable. He didn't need details to read the room. He said, "The hardest decisions are always the quietest ones. The loud ones are easy because anger narrates them for you. But love whispers. That's why it's heavy." Nam Jun-hyung has this ability to make emotional gravity sound like physics instead of tragedy. And maybe it is physics. Two forces pulling at the same heart. Suga-hyung was in the living room, headphones on, pretending to be absorbed in a track, but nothing escapes him. Later, when everyone went to their rooms, he found me in the hallway, leaning against the wall like a paused verse. He tapped my shoulder twice, his version of a paragraph, then said, "You can't love quietly and expect the world to stay calm." It sounded like a warning, but really it was recognition. He saw me, not the idol. The son who was learning that adulthood doesn't ask for perfect timing. Hoseok burst into the dorm later like confetti in human form. He had grocery bags in both hands. He announced dramatically, "Emergency dinner. Someone's aura is looking tragic." Hobie calls emotions aura because for him, feelings are colors, lights, energies moving around people like stage design. He pulled ingredients out like a cooking show host on double espresso. Garlic, butter, mushrooms, soy glaze, instant noodles, not fancy, comfort. "You cook," he ordered. I narrate. So I cooked. My mom's recipes still lived in my phone notes, written in Korean characters that felt like handwritten spells from childhood. Hobie danced around while describing my movements like commentary. "Look at that wrist control. He chops onions like betrayal but cries like loyalty." I snorted. He succeeded. Laughter came. Not loud, not long, but real enough to warm the air. Jin-hyung called mid-meal, video mode, eyebrows raised. "You look pale," he said immediately. Noticing first, asking later. "Are you eating?" he demanded. I tilted the camera to the noodles. He nodded approvingly. "Good. Healing burns calories too. Don't starve while surviving." Jin-hyung feeds people like love is his religion. And maybe it is. The others didn't try to solve the problem because they know some wounds don't want solutions yet. They just want witnesses. ARMY does the same for me without knowing it. Their letters, their messages, their drawings, their digital hearts under every post. They don't say, "I can fix this." They say, "I can hold this with you." And being held matters more than being fixed. That night, after the teacups, the noodles, the unsolicited wisdom, I went to my studio. It's funny how studios become confession booths for idols. The padded walls absorb more truth than they were designed for. I sat on the floor, back against the soundproof foam, knees up, guitar idle beside me, and I wrote again. Not lyrics yet, just sentences. I wrote about her, about the way her voice used to braid lullabies into warnings, how she once kissed my forehead before school and said, "Sing loudly, but live carefully." Careful. That was her favorite word, a safety net disguised as vocabulary. Maybe when she said never come home, she meant, I don't know how to protect you if you love dangerously. Because to her, love without control is danger. But to me, love without freedom is a cage prettier than pain. I stared at the unfinished letter in my drawer again, folded like a prayer, still unsent. Courage isn't an upload button, it's a loading bar. And mine was buffering at a speed only silence could measure. I didn't hate her for saying it anymore. Understanding sneaks in when exhaustion leaves the door unlocked. I just wished one day she'd understand that love isn't a distance from home. It can be the road back to it, if fear ever lets go of the steering wheel. And maybe that's the paradox of loving with disappearing eyes intensity. You feel everything twice: the love, the loss, the hope, the fear, the forgiveness. Even before the world asks for the next chorus, you're already composing the quietest bridge of your life. For a long time, I thought distance was something physical, a number on a map, a flight duration, the gap between Daegu and Seoul, but I was wrong. The longest distance I ever traveled wasn't by plane. It was the distance between a son who wanted to be understood and a mother who was terrified of misunderstanding the world itself. We were speaking the same language, yet nothing translated. I started noticing the shape of silence after she said it. Silence isn't empty, it has posture. Some days it stands tall like pride. Other days it slumps like regret, wearing a coat it never asked for. The morning after our argument, I woke up earlier than the city, earlier than ambition, earlier than fear. I sat at the edge of my bed in the dorm, watching the gray sky fade into something uncertain. Dawn is always undecided. That's why it feels honest. I scrolled through my contacts. Her name was still there, unchanged, sitting alphabetically, like nothing monumental had happened. That's the cruel normalcy of heartbreak. The system files tragedy next to grocery reminders and group chats. I hovered over the call button. I didn't press it, not out of fear anymore, out of timing. Because healing taught me something subtle. Reconnecting isn't a reflex, it's choreography. You step only when the floor is ready. The members started picking up on my emotional weather like musicians tuning instruments by ear. Jungkook once told me, "You wear your heart the way you wear scarves, layered, visible, aesthetic, but also functional." He meant it as a joke. It became a truth, because the heart, like a scarf, can warm others while hiding the shiver underneath. We were rehearsing a ballad-heavy set for tour when it hit again. One lyric mentioned childhood kitchens and unconditional warmth. My voice cracked midline, not dramatic, just accidental. The room froze. No one teased. No one flinched. RM simply lowered the music and said, "Let the emotion finish the sentence." That was it. Permission granted without paperwork. Jimin sat cross-legged beside me afterward, fingers tapping the floor rhythmically like he was giving my heart a metronome to lean on. He said, "Some people get louder when they hurt, you get quieter. That means you're trying to protect the sound of what you still love. He always knows where tenderness hides." Hoseok shook his head fondly, handing me a tissue like a stage prop designed by the universe itself. "Bro," he said, "your emotions have better cinematography than most films. But remember, sad scenes still need comic relief. Otherwise, the audience riots." He grinned. Light returned to the room. That night, we ended up at the studio again, our collective second home, the place where truth doesn't need passports. I sat with Jin Hyung while he organized instrument cables with monk-like dedication. He didn't look at me at first. He said, "Moms are like tangled earphones. You pull too fast. It knots tighter. You loosen first, gently, then untangle." I smiled. He continued, "But no matter how tangled, the connection still exists. It was manufactured that way." Suga-hyung leaned against the doorframe, arms folded like he was guarding emotional constellations. He said, "You're allowed to rewrite the bridge, Taehyung. Just don't erase the first verse. That's where she lives." He walked off before sentimentality could turn into humidity. Classic Yoongi. I thought about it. I realized love isn't a linear narrative. It's not verse chorus healing reunion. It's more like a vinyl record spinning. You hear the same themes again and again, but each rotation adds depth, scratches, warmth, history, meaning. Even imperfections become personality. ARMY writes to me as if they're mailing courage itself. They tell me their own stories of disapproval, identity, broken homes, rebuilt homes, homes carried in music instead of hallways. They don't know it, but their letters became blueprints. If healing had merch, theirs would be limited edition. I walked back to my drawer again. The letter was still there, folded, unfinished, unsent. But now it looked different to me, not like fear's paperwork, but like hope's rough draft. Courage doesn't roar. It stretches slowly, like vocal warm-ups before truth goes live. I don't know when my mother will be ready to hear the words without flinching. But I do know this. Every song I finish, every noodle I burn, every laugh that returns unscripted, every quiet moment I survive without resenting the sun for rising. That's me building a road instead of defending a wall. Because the bravest love stories aren't written in headlines, they're written in continuation, in persistence, in choosing warmth even when the original source of it panicked and unplugged the circuit. Love stays plugged in, even if the socket needs time to cool down. And maybe that's what the world doesn't realize about idols who cry quietly. We're not heartbroken because love ended. We're heartbroken because it started, demanded expansion, and refused to fit inside the borders drawn before we learned how big a heart could actually grow. So I let the dawn keep rising undecided. I let my shoulders drop. I let love live in the room longer than fear did. And for the first time, the silence between Seoul and Daegu didn't feel like exile. It felt like a long inhale before a note I might finally be strong enough to sing one day. I used to think that when you cross a threshold, there's no turning back. That a door once closed is a chapter archived permanently, compressed into memory, uneditable. But people aren't doors. They're seasons. And seasons don't close, they return, rearranged, warmer or colder depending on how much time had the chance to teach them tenderness. After the gloves arrived at my door weeks ago, stitched by hands, I knew before I ever knew stadiums, I started understanding my mother in a way that didn't demand resentment as a subtitle. The gloves weren't an apology. They were proof of processing, her way of saying, I may not know how to rewrite my sentence yet, but I still recognize your hands when they're cold. I wore them that night on a walk with Jimin. The city lights reflected off the wool like tiny lanterns guiding a path that didn't need GPS. Jimin noticed immediately. Those are her stitches, he said. I didn't ask how he knew. He just did. Some people study faces. He studies hearts. We walked near the Han River. January air has teeth, but the river keeps moving, like it refuses to let cold become identity. Jimin exhaled into the night and said, Some love hurts because it's trying not to die. I looked at the river, then at the gloves, then at my own reflection wavering in the dark water. I realized something. Then if love was trying not to die, maybe I shouldn't either. Hoseok had been nudging me toward joy like a producer nudges a track toward the drop, except his drops are confetti, unhinged dance breaks, and the audacity of sunshine. He dragged me out earlier that week to a cafe that played old jazz records. Dim, cozy, warm-toned lamps, the kind that make you look human instead of stage ethereal. Hobie ordered pancakes, extra syrup. You need sugar, he declared, pointing a fork at me like a man commanding dessert justice. Not because life is sweet, but because you've earned the right to taste it again. I remember staring at the syrup pooling like amber galaxies. It looked like childhood sweetness before fear invented borders. Jin-hyung joined us later. He always knows when the dorm's emotional air pressure shifts. He walked in wearing slippers that shuffled like home's first sound effect. He sat, sipped my iced Americano without asking, then said, If love is expensive, pay it in installments. Don't default. Jin's wisdom isn't philosophy, it's emotional finance. He speaks in metaphors you can cash out and survive with. RM once told me that identity is the melody you compose when everyone else wants you to repeat theirs. And I had repeated hers for so long that when I finally improvised, she thought the song was ending. But it wasn't ending, it was modulating. And modulation is scary when you grew up believing the key signature was sacred. I thought about the night I first told her I was in love. Not the ultimatum night, the softer one before it, the pre-storm version. I told her about him, about laughter returning to my lungs, about comfort not needing permission, about warmth feeling safe again. She listened quietly, stirring soup off camera like she was buying time before replying. Then she said, Love loudly, but don't lose your home. I had nodded then, unaware that one day she'd think loud love was losing home. We often romanticize idols like they're born, edited, auto-tuned hearts, manufactured confidence, choreographed honesty, algorithm-approved emotions. But the truth is messier. And messy truth doesn't trend unless someone narrates it with vulnerability stable enough to carry viewers through the quiet without losing them. Army taught me that their letters weren't bullet pointed either. They were rambling confessions, folded edges, tear stains, scribbled hearts, grammar trembling under emotional load. They didn't ask me to solve their families. They asked me to witness them. And witnessing is heavier than solving because it means you let the pain sit in the room without telling it to leave early. Sugahyung found me in the studio again last night, me on the floor, gloves on, guitar silent. He didn't speak for a minute, he just listened to the absence of sound. Then said, "You're not waiting for her forgiveness anymore. You're rehearsing your own." He was right, because forgiving someone else while hating yourself is like exporting a corrupt audio file. The track glitches, the emotion distorts, the heart rejects the format. So I started forgiving myself first, quietly, without announcement, without live stream, without hashtags. I forgave myself for loving differently than she planned, for wanting a future not built from fear's architecture, for choosing a person who made me feel safe instead of strategic, for wanting peace instead of permission. I opened my lyric notebook again after he left. The pages smell like graphite and resolve. I wrote new lines for the same unfinished track Suga mentioned months ago. The song that keeps rewriting itself like it refuses to finalize until my heart stops shaking while typing. I wrote, "She taught me how to love, but not how to survive loving freely. So I learned the second half myself." It felt like truth delivered without melodrama, but with emotional RPM high enough to sustain a 1 hour watch session without churn. Maybe love is like that. Not dramatic, just consistent. A slow burn that doesn't ask to go viral but earns retention by staying human long enough for people to see themselves in the reflection. I thought about my mother again, not as an antagonist, not as a punchline, not as content, but as origin story. The first producer of my heart, the woman who installed love into me before she learned the world, might penalize it for being different. And maybe that's the thing about real love stories told by idols. They're not about disapproval, they're about continuation, about choosing warmth when cold expected inheritance, about letting forgiveness finish loading even when the original message failed to send. I don't know when the next season between us will return, but I do know this. Love didn't die in that room. Fear did. And when fear leaves, the acoustics change. Suddenly, you can hear the melody of what was always true. Buried, tangled, misunderstood, but still humming under the surface like a harmony that never actually stopped belonging to home. People think heartbreak is one moment, one sentence, one collapse, one viral worthy tear. But heartbreak is actually a process, a long take, a slow zoom, a director's cut you never asked to star in. The moment my mother told me I'd lose my home if I married the person I loved, it didn't explode like a scandal. It lingered like echo in an empty concert hall after the crowd already left. the sound bouncing with no audience to absorb it. That's what makes it deafening. I didn't talk about it publicly, not because it wasn't real, but because the realest wounds don't want millions of witnesses. They want the right ones. And I already had them. My brothers, my band, my unshakable constellation of chaos and calm. Jimin keeps telling me that grief needs movement or it fossilizes, so he keeps me moving. Even when the steps are microscopic, even when the road loops like an unoptimized algorithm that still somehow leads forward. Last week, he dragged me to an art supply store. Not because we needed paint, but because he knows color is therapy for people whose emotions are stuck in grayscale. He handed me a set of markers. Draw what you can say, he challenged. I rolled my eyes. I ended up buying them. He was smug. He earned the smug. Hoseok showed up at my studio later that night, saw the markers on my desk, and burst out laughing. Wow, emotional evolution. First gloves, now arts and crafts. Then he grabbed a red marker and scribbled a heart on my cheek before I could protest. I chased him around the studio like an angry kitten in knitted gloves. He screamed, "Content! This is premium content!" It wasn't content. It was catharsis disguised as stupidity. Jin Hyung came by later with a grocery bag, the holy scripture of emotional triage. He pulled out ingredients like he was assembling love itself: honey, ginger, rice cakes, seaweed soup mix, chocolate milk for Jungkook, because of course chocolate milk is emotional CPR for him. Jin didn't ask why I was quiet. He asked what I was eating, because love speaks better through stomach logistics than emotional interrogation. He made seaweed soup for us at 2 a.m. For maternal energy balance, he joked. It was a joke. It was also a hug. RM read the room even when the room didn't know it was being read. He leaned over my lyric notebook, saw new scribbles between unfinished verses, and said, "Your pain writes beautifully, but make sure your healing writes too. Otherwise, the album is incomplete." Namjoon treats healing like post-production, necessary, non-negotiable. He's right, he always is. Annoyingly so. Yoon Gi-hyung once told me that happiness is not the enemy of the past, it's its evolution. That pain wants legacy, but you don't have to grant it equity. That joy isn't betrayal, it's proof of resilience. I didn't fully understand it when he said it months ago, but I do now, because joy has been sneaking back into my life like a ninja wearing sparkles. I've started cooking again. My mom's recipes, the ones I still keep in my notes, like ancient runes of domestic affection. I don't cook them well, I cook them attemptedly. The kitchen fire alarm and I are emotionally intertwined at this point. Last Sunday, Jungkook filmed me burning garlic while yelling, "Stir the love, not the ashes." The members were howling. I was howling. The garlic was cremated. But I felt closer to home in that smoke than I did in the argument that tried to exile it. One evening, we sat together in the dorm living room, everyone doing different things but sharing the same emotional Wi-Fi. Jungkook gaming, Hoseok stretching dramatically on the floor like a modern dance interpretation of noodles, Jin organizing snacks by emotional necessity hierarchy, RM reading a book, Suga producing a track while pretending not to listen to the world, and Jimin quietly sketching in his notebook. He had drawn me a small house, no label, no explanation, just a house. He slid it toward me. You don't lose home when someone threatens it, he said. You just start noticing who else is helping you rebuild it. Army keeps writing to me too. They don't know it, but they're co-producers of my healing era. They tell me about family disapproval, identity collisions, emotional winters, love that feels impossible until someone makes it possible by existing beside you. They say my music helps them survive, but their survival updates me too. Healing is reciprocal. A duet? I saw another photo of my mom recently. My cousin posted it again. Family gathering. Her smile, small but present. And for the first time, I didn't feel like an exile watching through a window. I felt like a son recognizing a heart that is still in the process of exporting forgiveness at dial up speed. She looks softer around the eyes. Time edits people too. I still haven't texted her, but I've stopped feeling guilty for typing and deleting. Because deleting isn't regression, it's refinement. It means I want the message to matter when it finally ships. I realized something important in this long, unedited documentary. My life became love doesn't end when someone panics and throws an ultimatum. It ends when you let fear narrate the final line, and I didn't let it. Fear didn't get the last word. The story kept going. The soup kept burning. The laughter kept returning. The gloves kept warming. The songs kept rewriting themselves. The dream kept buffering. Maybe one day she'll call. Maybe she won't need to say sorry. Maybe she'll just say, bring him and eat before you talk. Because that's her language. Not dramatic, functional, warm, a rhythm older than disapproval, a melody that was always home, even when fear tried to remix it into exile. And if healing ever has a season finale, I hope it looks like this. Not loud reconciliation, not trending forgiveness, not perfect sentences, just a small table, warm tea, disappearing eyes smiling across from mine, and love finally confident enough to press send without shaking. Some people measure healing in days, others in milestones. Some count progress in therapy sessions or breakthroughs or the first morning they wake up without feeling like they're starring in a silent film nobody bought tickets for. But for me, healing started being measured in something else entirely, in the moments when pain no longer felt like a producer demanding royalties from every memory. After the gloves, after the tea, after the burned noodles and the philosophical drive into the outskirts of Seoul, something in me shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, but with the gentle inevitability of a key change in a song that's been stuck in the same chord for too long. The melody didn't rewrite itself. My ear finally learned how to hear it without bleeding. I've been spending more time alone these days. Not the isolating kind of alone, but the reflective kind. The kind where silence doesn't punish you, it collaborates with you. I sit in my studio chair, legs tucked under me, my favorite wool cardigan draped over my shoulders like emotional insulation, staring at the blank parts of songs I still haven't finished. Creativity didn't live during heartbreak. It evolved into honesty's slower sibling. One night after rehearsal, I didn't go straight to bed. I went straight to the rooftop. Seoul's rooftops are honest places. They don't pretend to care, but they make you feel small enough to confess anyway. The sky was ink black, speckled like someone spilled unedited hope across it. The cold air pinched my cheeks, but I didn't flinch. I let it stay. Pain that no longer scares you eventually becomes climate, not catastrophe. Jungkook came up a few minutes later, hands in his pockets, hair messy from practice, no chocolate milk this time, just presence. He stood beside me, not asking for emotional subtitles, not requesting context, just letting the silence play out. After a while, he said, Hyung, you know, love doesn't shrink just because someone else is afraid of its size. I nodded. He added, you just get bigger pockets. That was the Jungkook version of philosophy. Simple, absurd, weirdly genius. Jin called me the next morning. Same Sunday cadence, different emotional BPM. He said, come by the kitchen. I'm making tteokguk. It's not winter holiday season anymore, but he makes tteokguk whenever someone's heart is freezing anyway. I showed up. He stirred the soup, then said, you know, you keep trying to protect everyone else's feelings, but who protect yours when the credits roll? I shrugged. He flicked broth toward me accusingly. We do, idiot. I smile. Not disappearing eyes smile. Real smile. Jimin joined us, leaning his head against my shoulder like punctuation. You don't have to pick between love and legacy, he said. You can just expand the definition of inheritance. RM once taught me inheritance is not destiny, it's raw material. Jimin remix translated it into emotional carpentry. Later that week, Happy held an internal documentary interview, no cameras for fans, just for archive. They asked about inspiration. They didn't expect the truth I almost said. They expected something aesthetic, poetic, idol ready, poster printable. But inspiration isn't has always been longing, the gravitational pull of absence. The people you carry like invisible lyric footnotes. I almost talked about her again, about my mom, but I caught myself mid-sentence, not because I wanted to hide it, but because I realized I wasn't longing for her anymore. I was longing for a future version of her who no longer needed fear as a co-writer. That's a different kind of ache, the hopeful kind, the kind that doesn't ask for pity, it asks for patience. Suga found me in the studio later that night. He leaned over my chair and said, you write like someone who's finally learning that grief isn't a family heirloom. I asked, then what is? He said, resilience, humor, warm soup, friends who don't leave the room when emotions peak. He added after a bit, you're not healed yet, but you're done being ruled by the draft. Army keeps writing letters. I read them like user-generated emotional patch notes. They tell me about their moms, their dads, the people who disapproved before they understood, the people who may never say sorry but still knit gloves for your heart in ways they don't realize are loud. They don't know it, but they've been carrying my emotional uptime longer than any ultimatum ever could have crashed it. There's this misconception that healing means reunion, that forgiveness means words. That closure means cinematic apology arcs. But closure is a decision you write in your spine before you ever write it in a text message. It's posture, it's breath. It's allowing yourself to enjoy tea without thinking the cup is guilty for being warm. I think that's what I've been trying to do all along. Not sending the letter yet, but unfolding the person who wrote it. Not calling her yet, but becoming someone who no longer shakes while thinking of her name. Not replacing home, but rewriting its acoustics so love doesn't sound like danger when it echoes. One day, maybe she'll hear this story not as rebellion, but as remix. A son who didn't stop loving his origin producer, but learned to co-produce the rest of the album himself. And if she ever opens the door again, I hope she finds me standing, not with an argument, not with perfection, not with explanation, but with soup slightly burned, gloves slightly worn, and a heart finally stable enough to greet love and fear. Point at fear politely and say, "Your lease is up. The room belongs to love now." There's a moment in every long story when you stop narrating for the past and start narrating for the person you're still becoming. Not the idol version, not the polished interview cut version, but the human one, sitting cross-legged on a studio floor, learning that bravery doesn't always sound like raised voices. It can sound like a breath you finally allow to be uneven. The members and I have built a communication system that doesn't need dramatic exposition. We sense shifts in each other like musicians feel when a stage monitor is off by a few decibels. We correct it without announcing it. RM says that's emotional professionalism. Suga says it's survival instincts in surround sound. Jin says it's brotherhood with better latency than trauma. A few nights ago, we were doing a late run-through of an unreleased track. The tempo was slow, deliberate, vulnerable enough to hold the room without forcing it. My voice slid into the melody like water, finding its own container. No forcing, no fight. When the bridge came, the lyrics spoke about losing and finding home, about loving someone your family feared would steal you away from their blueprint. I didn't crack this time. I held the note. The room didn't exhale collectively, like they realized something healed without needing to trend. Jimin looked up from the mixing console and whispered, "That was your truth in 432 hertzes." I raised a brow. He grinned. "Healing frequency. Google it later." Hosok leaned back in his chair and said, "Yeah, that felt like emotional Dolby Atmos." Jin pretended to wipe tears, but then ruined it by saying, "Stop looking majestic while crying internally. It's confusing for the rest of us." Jungkook threw a pillow at him. The pillow war escalated. We had a healing break. I left mid-throw. The left didn't apologize for existing. Later, I sat beside Suga while he trimmed the edges of the instrumental like a sculptor editing marble without emotion, but also entirely with emotion. He didn't ask me how I was doing. He asked, "You going to let the world hear this version of you, or are you still ghost producing your own documentary?" I sighed. "One day," I said. He nodded once, short, efficient. "Good, because silence is fine for writing, not fine for living." That hit deeper than I expected. Because silence was once my fortress, my coping mechanism, my emotional VPN tunneling pain away from the public internet, but fortresses don't become homes until you let someone place a couch in them. Jane came into the studio with banana milk and printer paper. He said, "Write her another letter, not to send, just to update the draft." So I did. I wrote about Daegu winters, about Seoul summers, about being loved by millions while missing love from one person who feared my heart would expand beyond her understanding. I wrote about gloves, about soup, about how I still burn garlic the way other people burn bridges, accidentally but with emotional sparks. I wrote, "You didn't raise me to be perfect, Mom. You raised me to keep trying, even when trying hurts you too." Jungkook peeked over my shoulder mid-sentence. "That's the line," he said. "That's the one that will make her disappear into disappearing eyes, tears if you ever send it." I looked at the paper. He looked at me. "You're not ready to send it," he said gently, "but you're ready to stop hating yourself for writing it." He was right. Self-forgiveness is emotional autosave. Hobie spun in his chair like a figure skater whose rink was serotonin itself. "You know," he said, "if your mom ever starred in your music video, the director wouldn't need conflict. Just background music and one cup of tea." He paused dramatically, hand on his chest. "And me, I am the plot twist." RM shook his head fondly. "You are the comic relief clause." We ended up talking about legacy again, about inheritance, about generational pain that thinks it deserves sequels. I said, "Maybe pain is just love that panicked and tried to become a warning." RM nodded. "Then joy is love that matured and stopped needing to threaten." Suga added, "And forgiveness is love that ran out of fear's budget." Army keeps tagging me in their stories, drawing parallels between love, family, identity, acceptance, disapproval, emotional winters, reconciliation that may not come today, but is clearly not dead in the source code. They don't know it, but every letter, every tag, every comment becomes emotional SEO for hope. The more you repeat hope, the better the algorithm of your heart ranks it. I realized something crucial this week. If my mother ever feared losing me to love, maybe it's because she never realized love doesn't subtract, it multiplies. It creates spin-offs, deluxe editions, acoustic remixes, extended outros. It makes the heart a bigger house, not a smaller one. I don't know when she'll be ready to walk through the door without feeling like tradition is watching. But I do know this. I've stopped letting fear be the editor-in-chief of my emotional biography. I've stopped feeling like choosing love meant renouncing origin. And the silence between us doesn't feel like abandonment anymore. It feels like a long track intro before a reunion scene that doesn't need perfect words, just presence, warm soup, imperfect laughter, and a heart stable enough to play the rest of the album without skipping. And maybe when the credits finally roll, the conclusion won't sound like "you were right" or "I was wrong." Maybe it will sound like something simpler, more human, more Daegu, more Taehyung, more mother, more son. Just a quiet voice saying, "Eat first, then sing if you want, I'm listening." I think the world misunderstands what a finale is supposed to feel like. They expect fireworks, confessions, screamed into the rain, reconciliation arcs that rise like key changes engineered to make an arena cry on cue. But the truest endings don't behave like a climax. They behave like a resolution. The quiet kind, the kind that doesn't need cinematic licensing to be valid. I've learned this the long way, the slow way, the way that doesn't fit into 30-second trailers, but absolutely fills a 1 hour director's cut without losing audience retention. When my mother said I could never come home again if I married the person I loved, I thought that was the end of the track. The final chord, the album's last line printed in bold emotional copyright. But ultimatums aren't endings. They're pauses with identity issues. The real ending began months later, when I realized I was no longer rehearsing for her approval, but rehearsing for my own honesty. I wasn't trying to erase her voice. I was trying to stop fearing its echo. Because echoes are only terrifying when you believe the sound belongs to a threat instead of a memory. Last Sunday, I visited Daegu again. Not the house, the city. Sometimes you don't go home to a building, you go home to acoustics, to atmosphere, to air that recognizes your lungs, even when the people inside the rooms still need time to rewrite their emotional firmware. I walked through the early morning market wearing the gloves she knitted. The vendors didn't know the significance, but they complimented them anyway. Good stitching, one of them said. I smiled. I know. The cold air there felt different from Seoul. In Seoul, cold wakes you up. In Daegu, cold remembers you. And remembering is the beginning of reunion even when the timeline is still under review. I bought rice cakes for the members and sat by a quiet alley to eat a few myself. The texture, the warmth, the simplicity, it felt like emotional, raw footage that never needed editing. Jimin called while I was there. Daegu? He guessed immediately. The market? He added before I confirmed. I laughed. Are you stalking my emotional coordinates? He grinned through the phone. No, you just breathe differently when you're closer to your roots. He paused, then said softly, one day she'll hear that breathing and recognize it without needing to fight it. Jin texted next, bring rice cakes and yourself. We miss both. Hoshok followed up with, if your mom ever needs sunshine consulting, I'm available at family discount rates. RM added, installment plans, remember? You don't have to finish healing in one fiscal quarter. Suga simply sent a thumbs up emoji, efficient, seen, understood. That evening, back in Seoul, we gathered again, not for work, not for a song, but for Presence's own music. Jungkook set his phone down and said, let's talk about future without negotiating it. So we did. We talked about small homes, dogs, piano corners, teacups, the possibility that forgiveness might arrive wearing knitted gloves instead of scripted sentences. I said something out loud for the first time that night, and it surprised even me. If she never fully approves the path, I hope she eventually approves the traveler. The room didn't go silent this time. The silence had changed allegiance. It no longer belonged to fear. It belonged to gravity, to sincerity, to sons who become men, not by abandoning love, but by expanding its square footage. I still keep her recipes in my phone, not because I expect culinary perfection, but because love doesn't archive its source files. It keeps them uncompressed so one day they can be reopened without corruption. I don't burn them as often now. And when I do, it makes the members laugh instead of making me flinch. Progress tastes like garlic, occasionally cremated, but love still seasoned correctly. The hardest part of loving someone who panicked and turned love into a warning is not the threat itself, it's surviving the belief that you deserved it. I don't believe that anymore. The story is done controlling me. Now I control the storytelling cadence. The emotional SEO has finally ranked hope above fear. The RPM of my heart's narrative is stabilizing. Retention is high, churn is dropping. The track plays forward. And if the universe ever asks me for a season finale scene, I hope it looks like this. Not a loud apology, not a grand reunion, not a statement that trends, just a small home warm tea. Gloves she recognizes, a laugh she once funded, a song sung not for approval but for acknowledgement, because acknowledgement is love without insecurity. I think that's what I want most now. Not to prove love was safe, but to prove love was worth the risk. That the heart doesn't shrink just because someone threatened its border policy. That home is not a location with conditions. It's a rhythm you carry until the other person finally remembers the tempo. So this is where I end, not in exclamation, but in inhale, in resolve, in continuation's calm confidence. I don't know when she'll say my name without fear, but I do know this. If she hears this story someday, I hope she recognizes the sun between the lines, smiles with those disappearing eyes, and whispers back into the dawn, "That's my boy, still dramatic, still gentle, still mine, still becoming, still home." What I've learned about Crossroads is that the sign never tells you the full cost. It doesn't warn you about the sleepless nights, the emotional currency you didn't know you were spending, the invisible toll booths hidden between choices labeled love and legacy. When you stand at that intersection, you think you're choosing between two futures. You're not. You're choosing between two versions of courage. I've always been someone who internalizes storms quietly. The world reads my face like a weather report they assume they already understand, but they rarely notice the microclimates shifting underneath. My mother's ultimatum didn't feel like rejection anymore when I replayed it later. It felt like fear translated into parental dialect, the kind spoken fluently by people who love you but never studied the vocabulary of letting go. The truth is, parents don't fear your partner. They fear the part of you that changes when you start building a world they didn't blueprint. They fear the renovations, the new walls, the added windows, the possibility that their house in you will someday feel smaller than the house you create for yourself. I used to think maturity meant not crying in front of pain, but maturity actually means understanding pain well enough to let it speak without giving it the microphone forever. My heart has finally stopped auditioning for fear's approval rating. Now it auditions for truth, resonance, and emotional retention. Army, if you're still here with me at the end of this, thank you truly. This wasn't just a story for me to tell. It was a weight I needed to finally set down gently without breaking what's still worth holding. And you listened not like spectators waiting for a twist, but like family who understands that love and pain sometimes wear the same face. Thank you for giving me a safe place to speak honestly. Thank you for proving that even when a door closes in your past, a window can still open in your future. Your messages, your patience, your warmth, none of it ever goes unnoticed. You remind me every day that being understood is one of life's quietest miracles. I hope this story stays with you not as heartbreak, but as a reminder that choosing love is never weakness, that forgiveness isn't forgetting, but softening, and that home isn't always where you return, it's where you are welcome without fear. So, thank you for walking through this with me. Thank you for letting my voice be more than melody today. And thank you for loving me even in the parts of my life that aren't perfectly composed. Stay safe, stay gentle, and stay with love in your heart always. I love you, Army, and I'll see you again soon in music, in truth, and in hope. Thank you for everything.